Hey guitarists, Metz here, or Guillaume Metz, my name in French. Welcome to this video. Today I'm super excited because I decided to make a video on the pentatonic scale, or to be more precise, the pentatonic scales, major and minor. Now I know that the pentatonic scale is usually the guitarist's favorite scales to begin with, and there's great reasons for that. It's fairly accessible or easy technically to learn at least the first shape of the minor pentatonic scale, which is what most guitarists begin with when it comes to learning pentatonic scales. This one right here. Now quickly you realize that minor pentatonic shape can be movable, and so if you can play it in A minor, you can play it in E minor and D minor. You just have to find where you want to put your root note, right, on the low E string, and boom, you can play. Other than the fact that the pentatonic scale is fairly easy to play on the guitar, it's just a great scale. It sounds amazing, and it's used by everyone all over the world to make melodies, solos, hooks. It really doesn't matter what genre you listen to, pentatonic scales will always be there. They're very melodic, hooky, easy to listen to. So they're great scales to know if you want to start making your own melodies or writing your own lines or making your own solos. Now here's the catch. Many guitarists don't dive deep enough into the mastery of the pentatonic scales. And in fact, I hear many guitarists that complain about being stuck melodically, or they feel like they need to learn new scales, and they say, or come to me and say, you know what, I only know the pentatonic scale. I want to learn new things. And what I'll tend to ask them first is, okay, well then, how about you play me the G major pentatonic scale all over the fretboard? And here there's one of two things that happen. But usually what they're going to do is say, well, I don't really know the major pentatonic scale, I only know the minor pentatonic scale. But isn't G major relative to E minor? So is that here E minor? So that's the G major pentatonic scale? Well, as we'll see, that's not entirely correct. And usually you don't want to always be using that clutch of the relative scale, so the relative minor scale in this case, to play the major pentatonic scale. You need to learn both separately. Now then usually what I'll realize is that not only this, but they don't really know more than one shape really well. All right, they'll learn this shape, and sometimes there will still be some mistakes, right? So they'll play it and then it'll be like, oh wait, no, not this one. Or like, wait, no. Oh, right, that's the one. Okay, so that's not what I call knowing something, okay? Knowing the pentatonic scale is not just kind of knowing one shape of that pentatonic scale, or what people call one box, all right? We'll talk about what knowing or mastering the pentatonic scale really means in this video. But really, to give you an overview, what it means is to know the pentatonic scales, major and minor, as such, right, without having to relate to the relative major or minor to find your way, and to know them in all the shapes, all over the fretboard, in any key. Essentially, you need to be able to take, for example, a G major pentatonic and play all the shapes. But in every shape, you need to be able to relate this shape to an associated chord so that you know where your most important chord tones are in this pentatonic shape. And this is going to bring us back to the cage system and the study of the cage system. What you also need to be able to do is to be kind of anywhere on the fretboard. So for example, say I put your hand anywhere on the fretboard and I say, okay, you're here, play me G major pentatonic. You need to be able to think, oh, well, okay, where's G? G is here. So that's this shape. Okay, got it. Here's G major, right? You don't want to always be relying on a sequence starting with the same shape and having to climb up these shapes to find your way, okay? That's important when you want to really master the pentatonic scale. So basically what I mean here is before you start looking into new tools, new scales, new modes, etc., make sure that you really master the pentatonic scale. Like I said, you know, major and minor everywhere, up and down, all over the fretboard. Then if you're still stuck and you still feel like your solos are lacking something or some color or some tools, you can start exploring more things. But the pentatonic scale is foundational for guitarists. It's foundational not just because, again, it's great to play solos, but because it has great navigational value. It's not too overwhelming, right? There's only 5 notes, as we'll see in the pentatonic scale. And it gives you some easy landmarks everywhere all over the fretboard. And after you know those scales, it becomes easier to learn the other scales and modes on top of your pentatonic framework or foundation. And if you think right now, well, no, I really know all my shapes, don't worry about it, I know my pentatonic scale, I would still encourage you to keep listening, because the pentatonic scale is never something that you're done practicing as a guitarist. There's no such thing as knowing your pentatonic scale, done, let's practice something else. It's so crucial to always keep practicing it. And if you think it's too easy, really what you need is new, more complicated or challenging exercises to get yet to another level of the pentatonic scale. But I guarantee you can take any guitarists and make them struggle by touching the right levers or pulling the right levers, even with the pentatonic scale, even if they think they know it. I was just recently watching this interview of Rick Beato with Matteo Cesato, who's one of the greatest guitarists, and he was asking about his practice routines. And sure enough, Matteo said, when I really want to practice something, I always like to go back to the pentatonic scale because it's great, it refreshes me on all my shapes and gives me good landmarks on the fretboard, and it's also great for my ear, for my technique, right, for all the dimensions that you need to practice in music. So in this video, what I'm going to do is quickly give you a definition of pentatonic scales and then the major and minor pentatonic scale. We're going to go through each shape quickly of the major and the minor pentatonic scales. And then after this, I'm going to give you a step-by-step method that I have been using for years and that I give all my students. And that step-by-step method can be your structure and framework to make you master those pentatonic scales if you're still in the case where you're not 100% and you know you could probably get better at them. Or maybe you don't know the major pentatonic, you just know the minor pentatonic. That process, that step-by-step method will get you there, I guarantee, if you implement it. But the cool thing is that there's also some flexibility in the method I'm going to give you. The general steps are all the same, but depending on your skill level, there's some steps that you can bypass or go faster. And then there's some levers that you can pull, again, in each category that will allow you to make each step a little more difficult and adapt to your skill level so that you can always use that process regardless of where you're at in your journey. Now, all the things that we're going to be covering today, by the way, will have some associated PDFs and documents. You'll have all the pentatonic diagrams and the full layout of my practice routine. If you want to access these documents, just click below. There is a link that'll take you to a little sign-up page. You put your email, and then I email you directly those PDFs. You're totally free to unsubscribe after this. There's no strings attached. But just so you know, I don't send spam. I would just only send you emails that I think you might find valuable if you sign up. So again, sign up and you'll get those documents for free. Finally, before we get into it, please know that if you enjoy these videos, if you think my content is valuable and helping you, please subscribe. That's the best way to help me sincerely. Subscribe, click the little bell icon or notification thing. This way you get notifications when I come up with new content, which I'm trying to make more and more of these days, as much as I can. All right, so what are pentatonic scales? Well, I would say on the larger level, a pentatonic scale is simply a 5-note scale, right? That's what pentatonic means in Greek. Penta is 5, and the pentagon, and tonic, tones or notes, 5 tones. There are a lot of pentatonic scales. There isn't just the minor or major pentatonic scales. Many different countries have some very interesting sounding pentatonic scale, and you can absolutely check them out if you're interested. But amongst all these different pentatonic scales, the ones that are used the most, specifically in the music that most people listen to nowadays in our globalized world, so I would say the Western influenced music, are the major pentatonic and the minor pentatonic. So the major and the minor pentatonic are both derived from the full major for the major pentatonic and the full natural minor scale for the minor pentatonic. All right, they're derived from these two scales, which are 7-note scale, right? The major scale is, and the minor scale. So a quick definition or reminder on the major scale. Remember, a scale is just a way to divide an octave with a certain sequence of whole steps and or half steps. And that specific sequence is associated to a specific scale or a type of scale. So any major scale will follow this following sequence. So you start from the first note, which becomes what we call the tonic of your scale. And then you're going to go up a whole step, another whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. That's the definition of a major scale. When you go up this sequence, you go up 6 full steps, and that's the distance associated with an octave. So you're back on the same note as you started with, but an octave above. Now that definition is great, but it doesn't really give us much information about the general sound of the scale when it comes to the intervals that it's made of. At the end of the day, every tool in music sounds the way it sounds because of all the intervals that it's made of. And you can watch my video on intervals if this is something that doesn't make sense to you. So one of the best ways to define a scale rather than just the sequence is to look at the interval that each note makes with the tonic of the scale. If we look at a major scale, we get our tonic, a major second, a major third, a perfect fourth, perfect fifth, major sixth, major seventh, and we're back at our tonic, so the first note. So the major pentatonic scale is this scale minus the fourth and the seventh. And what you're left with is your tonic, major second, major third, perfect fifth, major sixth, and back to your tonic. Now, what's really interesting, and we'll talk about this in later videos, is that by getting rid of the fourth and the seventh in your major scale, you're actually getting rid of 2 notes that are sometimes a little bit problematic or risky. You'll notice by playing the full major scale over major chord progressions, for example, say you're in here when it was an E major pentatonic, say you're in E major, you'll notice that sometimes over specific chords, the fourth and the seventh are going to clash a little bit. They're not going to sound great. One thing I like to say is that diatonic doesn't mean consonant, right? It's not because it's in the scale that it necessarily works, depending on the scale and depending on the context. Well, with the pentatonic scale, however, by getting rid of that fourth and that seventh, you actually have a very, very versatile scale. And in many, I would say in most major contexts, the associated major pentatonic is going to work 100%. You're not going to have any notes that sound straight up bad. So it's a very safe bet, which is again another reason why it's great to know that scale. You're not going to make any mistakes. Your notes will at least be accurate. Before we move on to the minor pentatonic scale, I want to point out that the major pentatonic scale can also be seen as a major triad, 1, 3, 5, plus a major second and a major sixth. So the major pentatonic is not too far away from a major chord, and that's going to come in really useful when it comes to navigating the pentatonic scale, as we'll see. It's also great to notice that these 2 extra notes are not dissonant, but they have an extra bit of color or tension to them, as opposed to the 1, the 3, and the 5. When you play a major second, there is enough tension to that note that it's not displeasing, but it kind of wants to resolve back to the 1 or go up to the major third. Same for the 6th. It wants to go up to the 1 or down to the 5th, to more stable intervals. So you've got 2 extra color notes compared to the triad. These color notes are still a little tense, and that's going to play. These 2 color notes are still, they have a little bit of tension to them, which is why you're always going to want to favor, when you want to resolve the sound or resolve your lines, you want to favor the main chord tones, 1, 3, 5. All right. So this is a huge thing when it comes to improvising, that difference between accuracy and intentionality. When you play a pentatonic scale, your chances of playing notes that aren't wrong or that don't sound bad are pretty much 100%. But it doesn't mean that it's going to be the exact note that you're going to want to hear on each chord. And so that's the main difference in soloing between accuracy and intentionality. You can be accurate just by playing the right notes, and that's already a huge step. That's why you want to learn your pentatonic scale over the fretboard. But the step after that is to be intentional and accurate. Intentional means not only am I playing a note that sounds pretty good or that sounds accurate, but it's the note that I wanted to hear there, and I can proactively play what I want. It takes a lot of experience, a lot of ear training, but the exercises that I'm going to talk to you about in this video are going to help you there. Okay, so the minor pentatonic scale is derived from the full minor scale, natural minor scale. Now, the natural minor scale has, of course, a different melodic path or sequence of whole steps and half steps to divide an octave. With the natural minor scale, you start with your tonic, you go up a whole step, which brings you to a major second. So at this point, no difference with the major scale. But then you go up a half step, and that brings you to a minor third. Then we go up another whole step, which brings us to the perfect 4th. Whole step to the perfect 5th. A half step, which then takes you to a minor 6th. Very dark interval. A whole step a whole step to the minor 7. Another whole step back to your octave. The minor pentatonic scale is a natural minor scale minus the 2nd and minus the 6th, or minor 6th. So it sounds like this. We're left with tonic, minor 3rd, perfect 4th, perfect 5th, minor 7th. Notice again how the minor pentatonic scale is a minor triad, 1 flat 3 5, to which we're adding 2 notes, the 4th and the flat 7th. So if I start with a minor triad, okay, so that's for the theory bit. Now we know what the major and the minor pentatonic scale are. Notice how they are different things. It's not like I define the minor pentatonic scale and says, well, then for the major pentatonic, you just blah, 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 shuffle the notes around. That's not how it works. They're different scales with different sounds, different intervals. They're used in different contexts. So they need to be treated differently in many ways, okay? Now we'll see, of course, that they have connections between them. There is such a thing as relative scales, but people use this relativity as a crutch when really you shouldn't most of the time. Okay, so now let's try to learn all the shapes of the major and minor pentatonic scale. The best way to do this is to learn your caged system first. If you don't know the cage system, I made a masterclass on it. I'll link in the description, or there might be a link up there somewhere. And I went in depth for about an hour and a half, 2 hours about the cage system. I invite you to watch that video. There's also other great resources out there about the cage system. But remember, at the end of the day, the cage system is a way for you to know where those main chord tones, 1, 3, and 5, or in the minor case, 1, flat 3, and 5, R on the fretboard. And you do this by mapping out the fretboard with 5 different shapes which correspond to the open shapes on the guitar taken up the fretboard. The cage system stems from how the guitar is tuned, and the guitar was tuned for open strings. So for example, if I want to map the whole fretboard in G major, well, I'll start with, first you got to know your notes on the E and the A string. They're going to be your main landmarks for the cage system. So I'll start with my G shape here. Then on the other side, I have my E shape, D shape, C shape, A shape, and back to the G shape. And then it would start again, okay? So these shapes, 5 shapes of the cage system, kind of string together over one whole octave of the fretboard. And they're all basically different combinations of 1s, 3s, and 5s. What you need to know again is where the root is on the E and the A string, then know the organization of chord tones around these main landmarks. What I say is you need to know what's happening under each finger, right? When I play this, what is the interval of each of these notes compared to my root? Same here. Now that's a whole other lesson, but you need to start there, because what ends up happening is if you know your cage system in major chords like this, well, what did we just see? We saw that the major pentatonic is essentially a major chord plus 2 notes. So there's not going to be a lot of difference between these chord shapes and the pentatonic shapes. They're very similar. You'll find the chord shape embedded in the pentatonic shape. So it's great for you to remember these pentatonic shapes, right? It's great to, if you see those similarities, it'll be easier to remember. But also, as you're playing your pentatonic scale, you'll know where the main chord tones 1, 3, and 5 are. Because remember, the 2 and the 6 in the case of the major pentatonic, and the 4 and the flat 7 in the case of the minor pentatonic are a little more dissonant, a little more tense than the other chord tones. So it's good to be able to land on those chord tones when you want. And that comes from an understanding of the cage system. So let's start with our E shape here. That's G major in the E shape in the pentatonic scale that corresponds as this one. In the D shape, next shape over here. So you go up an octave, that was your root for the E shape, go up to D over here, and you have your root for the D shape. Start on the root, and then go up and down your pentatonic shape. Third shape, the C shape. A shape. And G shape. You could also play the G shape up here with open strings. So notice how I associated each major chord to a pentatonic scale. And if you pay close attention, wherever my root is, or my tonic in case of the scale, but wherever my first note is, I always start with that note. I play the chord, go up, go down all the way, and back to my first note. And then I play the chord again. I'm trying to really link chords, pentatonic scales, major chords, major pentatonic scales, and always be aware of where my 1 is, rather than just what most guitarists do. They learn boxes, and they always start with the lowest note of this box. And because of this, they never really know where the 1 is, where the 3rd is, where the 5th is, right? They go like this, box 1, box 2. A lot of guitarists say they feel like they're boxed in. Well, if you learn boxes, you'll be boxed in. But if you learn the scales in reference to other tools such as chords and you're aware of where all your chord tones and notes and intervals are, that's going to make a huge difference for you. So again, every shape, you play the chord first. Where is my 1? You start with 1, go up, go down to the lowest note in this shape, and go back up and play your chord again. Don't use the boxes, because the boxes for pentatonic scales, or any scales really, are a great way for guitarists to basically not do the work of understanding which chord tones, which intervals they're actually playing, because they don't have any association for these boxes. Really what they're learning is a sequence. They learn a box, number 1, and they always have to come back to that box to move up and down the fretboard. And you don't want that. You want to be able to be anywhere on the fretboard and know exactly where to catch the shape that you need in this spot to play whatever pentatonic scale you want. Remember this, because of how the guitar is designed, there's always a way to play any scale with any different key anywhere you are on the fretboard. And it's an exercise it's part of the routine I'm going to give you. But basically, there's an exercise where I'll tell you to just put yourself on a random spot on the fretboard and then say, okay, here we are on fret number 6, play me D minor pentatonic. And you have to find the closest way. There's always a way. Where's D minor here? Right there. Or actually, there's another option. Right there. What am I using there? Not boxes. Because if not, I would have to go back to my D minor and climb down and everything. You don't want to have to do this. That's how you stay stuck. Anyway, rant over. Let's do the same thing with the minor pentatonic scale. So we're going to look at G minor pentatonic scale, which is going to be played over each shape of the minor cage system for G minor. Here's our E shape. Here's our D shape. Here's our A shape. And here's our G shape. There we go. So here again, I mapped the whole fretboard in G minor pentatonics. And each time I associated a minor chord to the pentatonic scale that I'm playing. Okay, so now that we defined major pentatonics and found how to find each shape in the major cage system, and same thing with minor pentatonics and the minor cage system, we are going to talk about relative scales. And we're also going to talk about a concept that you might not be familiar with, which is parallel scales. Now, they're different terms and they're both extremely useful for different reasons. But we're actually going to start with parallel because it's very easy to define what parallel scales are. Parallel scales have the same tonic, but are different scales. So for example, C major pentatonic is parallel to C minor pentatonic. So parallel scales have the same starting point or the same reference note, but they have different notes. Playing parallel minor and major pentatonic scales like this is extremely useful for several reasons. The first reason is that there is context in which you are going to have to mix between the major and parallel minor pentatonic scale or vice versa. The blues is a great example. Part of what creates the signature sound of a blues is that mix or ambivalence between minor and major pentatonic. It's not just useful in blues. There's also some tunes where that just simply modulate from the major key to the parallel minor key. So it'll go from C major and then another section of the tune C minor. There's also a lot of what we call borrowings in certain tunes where for just a little, for one chord or just a little section of the chord progression, you have to modulate towards the parallel minor or parallel major. So knowing to switch between the two is absolutely essential in many, many different styles and situations. Now, the other reason why it's very useful to learn parallel minor and major pentatonic scales is for the navigational value. And I don't know exactly what it is that really kind of helps guitarists when they do this, but I've noticed that doing these exercises where you go through each shape of the cage system and you go major, minor, just gives you a better understanding of the major pentatonic versus the minor pentatonic. When you're playing parallel scales like that, it's very obvious how minor and major pentatonic sound different. That's not quite as obvious when you play relative scales, as we'll see in just a second. So most guitarists have heard of what we call relative scale. What are relative scales? Well, if you take a major scale, for example, the C major scale, you notice that with every major scale, there is a minor scale, a natural minor scale, that has the exact same group of notes as that major scale, provided that you start that minor scale on the sixth note of the major scale. So if we're in C, C, D, E, F, G, A, if you start a minor scale with A and follow again the path, the melodic path or sequence associated with the natural minor scale, you'll get A goes up a whole step to B, half step to C, whole step to D, whole step to E, half step to F, whole step to G, whole step to A. So you're generating the same notes whether you make a C major scale or an A minor scale. Because these two scales have the same notes, they will be called relative scales. Now, another way to say this, if you want to get fancy, and we're going to talk about this in later videos, is that the minor scale or natural minor scale is a mode of the major scale. Because if you're in a major scale and change your reference note to the sixth note of that major scale, you will get a natural minor scale with the same notes. Now, this relationship is also valid the other way around, of course. Naturally, since every major scale has a relative minor scale, every minor scale also has a relative major scale. When you're in the major scale, to get the relative minor tonic, you need to go up to the sixth note, or you can also go down 3 notes from the tonic of the major scale. Same thing. When you're in the minor scale and you want to find the relative major scale, you simply go up 3 notes. So if you're in A minor, A, B, C is the third note, and that's C major. All right? That relationship is preserved with the pentatonic scales, meaning that if C major is relative to A minor with the full 7-note scales, C major pentatonic is also relative to A minor pentatonic. And this makes sense because if you look at which notes are taken out, for example, of the C major scale, again, it's the 4th and the 7th, which are F and B. Now, the relative minor is A minor, and we saw that in the minor pentatonic, we're taking out the 2nd and the flat 6. The 2nd is B, the flat 6 is F in A minor. So the same notes are taken out in a major scale going to the major pentatonic than when you look at the minor scale going to the minor pentatonic. Again, these things might sound obvious, but they're really not, right? It's not obvious that you would take the same notes out of a major pentatonic than you would its relative minor. It could be otherwise, but turns out that's the way it is. Now, when you're looking at pentatonic scales, it's even easier to find a relative because when you're in the major pentatonic, notice that you're taking out the 7th. So you just have to go back 1 note from the tonic to the major 6th, and you've got your relative minor. So if I'm in C major, go down from C to the note that's right before C in the C major pentatonic, that's A. That's a relative minor tonic directly. Same the other way around. If I'm in A minor, well, Normally you would have to go A, B, C to the third note, but because we scratch B in the minor pentatonic, it's simply the next note right after the tonic, the flat 3. That's our relative major key. Now here's the thing. Relative scales have the same notes, yes, but they are two different scales. And just think about it. There's a reason why we call these two scales different things. Why we don't just have A minor, but we actually do have a C major scale, even though it has the same notes. And the reason is contextual. You can't really know what scale you're playing until you give a context behind it. Am I in C major or A minor? Well, it depends. If I'm just playing the notes of these two scales, they are the same notes. So what's going to determine whether or not you're in an A minor or C major context is which notes are emphasized or stand out as the most important notes. One way you can do this is by the way that you weave your melodies. If I articulate my notes and give a special importance to the note C, like this, because I finished on the note C, you're naturally going to think that that's the starting point, or that's the most important note. If I did the same kind of lick but finished on A, you would naturally think that that's your one note. So here I'm melodically kind of emphasizing what my tonic is. But in many cases, what's going to determine what tonic you're actually considering and what your one note is, and if you're in C major or A minor, is the musical context. By musical context, I mean either the chord progression, which is usually going to be built around either a C major chord or an A minor chord, or sometimes the bass note, or sometimes the bass note. The bass note naturally acts as a reference for our ear. And so if I'm playing all the notes of C major, but in the background I have my bass player playing the note A, I can be thinking C major all I want. To a listener that's receiving the whole musical information, that doesn't know what I'm thinking about, they're gonna hear A minor, because the bass kind of suggests with that bass note that A is the tonic, and therefore my notes will be colored with A minor. The note A will be heard as the 1, the note G as the flat 7, the note E as the 5th. Whereas if the bass player was playing a C in the background, now my E, for example, takes the sound of a third, major third. My G is now the 5th. My A is now the major 6th. And C becomes the 1. So you see how when I switch my framework, when I switch my reference from the major tonic to the relative minor tonic, I might be playing the same notes, but the interval that each of these notes represent with the tonic changes. C is the 1 in the C major scale, but it's the flat 3 in the A minor scale. And so it means something completely different. We all know that ending a line with the tonic is usually a good idea if you want to resolve all the tensions and really show that you're resolving on the one note. Well, the one note's different. A is the one note in A minor. In C major, A is the major 6, which not only is not a resolving note, but it's actually, like we saw in the beginning of the video, more of a tension note. It's unstable, right? If I play A versus C, finishing a line on that note is not going to resolve super well. Right? You want to hear that resolution, okay? Long story short, what this means is that you cannot use relative major and minor scales to find your way on the fretboard, or at least you shouldn't, or you should try not to. You need to study major pentatonics as their own scales over major chords, and minor pentatonics as their own scales over minor chords in the minor cage system. When you're practicing major pentatonic, forget that minor scales are even a thing, and vice versa. When you're practicing minor pentatonics, forget that major pentatonics are a thing. Try to be able to see your fretboard with either a major framework with major chords everywhere, major pentatonics, and a minor framework. Now, once you get comfortable with major on one side and minor on the other, of course you want to start studying the connection between relative scales. And the reason for that is that, well, there are tunes that will modulate to the relative minor, relative major. And when that happens, you need to be able in each shape to still play the same notes but change that framework. For example, if I'm in my G shape of C major, the notes are, and the notes are the same in A minor, but the chord that I'm seeing as my reference triad when I switch to A minor is this A minor in the E shape. And now A becomes my 1, E is my 5th, A and C is my minor 3rd. We'll see that in the step-by-step method. The best way to really be aware of this is to practice with a drone note or a single chord in the background so that you can really hear the difference. Because if it's just you and your fretboard and you're just playing these notes, again, you really only have, it's only melodically that you can emphasize where the one is and all the other intervals. But when there is a drone note, a reference note in the background that acts as an anchor for your ear, you will hear what the one note is, or what the 3rd is, or the 5th is. It's a great ear training exercise. So drone notes are amazing for this, and we're going to talk about this in just a second. Again, guys, if you enjoy these videos, longer format videos, understand they're a lot of work, and I'm making them available to you for free. So if you want to support, please subscribe, hit the bell icon. This really helps me. Okay, time for the step-by-step practice method. Okay, so the first thing I like to do is to pick a note as my main tonic or main reference for my studies. So to do this, I like to use the random note picker. And again, I'll link you to the random note picker. It'll be in the PDF. But basically it just generates random notes. Pick one, and then use this as your reference for the rest of these steps. I, over here, generated a B flat. So I guess B flat is our reference. Step number 2 is going to be some music theory. So it's a great opportunity for you to just kind of refresh what a major pentatonic is, or minor pentatonic, what intervals they're made of, and then to quickly find the notes of a given major or minor pentatonic, as well as the relative or parallel scales. Okay, so it's a really short exercise, or at least it will become shorter and shorter as you get used to it. Now, if you're super comfortable with it, and I say, okay, B flat minor, and you can just say the notes quickly, like kind of on the spot, then maybe you can skip that step. But I guarantee that for most of you, it's going to take you a little bit to think about it. And so it's always great to do this, even if you're good, right? Take this. Every practice can be an opportunity to practice just a little bit of theory. So today, again, the key center is B flat. So we're going to start with B flat major. You could do B flat minor. It doesn't matter. We're going to go through all of them, okay? So let's start with the major scale. Major, B flat major pentatonic. So I start with B flat, go up a whole step to C, go up a whole step to D, go up a half step to E flat, go up a whole step to F, go up a whole step to G, whole step to A, and I'm back on my B flat. Boom. That's a B flat major. So the pentatonic scale, major pentatonic scale, we scratch the 4th and scratch the 7th. So we've got these intervals, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. Boom. There you go. Just define the major pentatonic scale. Now, what would the G minor pentatonic scale? Now, what would the relative minor pentatonic scale be for B flat? Remember, you can go up to the 6th, And you can access this by going up 6 notes from B flat over here, or down 3 notes from the tonic over here. So G minor is your relative minor. And then just write the notes of G minor. So here's the relative minor. So it goes G straight to B flat, right, which is our flat 3. Then we've got C and D, that's the 4 and the 5. And then finally, we have F, which is our flat 7. There we go. We've got the major, B flat major, and the relative G minor pentatonic. We're doing great. Okay, so now let's look at the parallel scale. What's the parallel scale to B flat major? Well, we know it's B flat minor. What are the notes of B flat minor? Let's do it. So we've got B flat, whole step C, half step D flat, whole step E flat, whole step F, half step G flat, whole step A flat, and finally whole step B flat. Boom. Now we know that to get the minor pentatonic, I take the 2nd and the 6th out. There we go. So 1, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 7. Here's my B flat minor pentatonic. What's the relative major? Well, we're going from minor to major, so we just go up to the 3rd note of the major scale, which, again, if you're looking at the pentatonic, it's simply the next note up. It's D flat. So D flat major is a relative major to B flat minor. Now, just doing this goes a long way when it comes to making you a better musician and specifically to understand theory better. Now, if you're already sighing like, oh, that's boring, again, understand that, well, sorry, but if you want to be serious about playing the guitar, you've got to learn to do these things. You can't be the person that doesn't know how to come up with the notes of a scale. You got to know these things, and it's not that difficult. And after a little bit of practice, it takes just a little, like a few minutes, like it just did over here. It can even go faster because it was explaining everything here. Okay, now step 3 is going to be some pure fretboard navigation and visualization exercises. Now again, don't sigh. If it sounds boring, sorry, but these are the best things that you can do if you want to make some real progress. Again, one of the reasons why guitarists get so lost and confused on their fretboard is because they actually never spend time looking at it. They're always lost in the noodling, the playing, the whatever they're doing, and they never actually spend time just looking at how it's laid out. So in this exercise, essentially, you're going to make some fretboard diagrams. There's going to be a link to the video with the email. If you enter your email there, you'll have some blank fretboard diagrams. And what I want you to do for this exercise is simple. Take the guitar, put it down. It's you versus a piece of paper with a blank fretboard diagram. What you're going to do is map out the fretboard with your pentatonic scales. So first thing you're going to do is look at the notes of the cage system. So we're in B flat, which means we're actually our root. There's one root over here, our 1, and then there is a 1 over here. All right? And then there's also 1 over here. Then you can go up your octave and know that you have this one there. So these are our main roots. We're going to start with B flat major. So what are you going to do? You're going to write down your shapes, all the shapes starting with each of these roots, the shapes of the major triads in the cage system. So here you'd have your A shape starting there. So you have 5, 1, 3, 5. Boom, that's the A shape. Then here you have the G shape, 1, 3, 5, 1, 3. Here you have your E shape, 1, 5, 1, 3, 5, 1. Boom. Here you have your D shape, 5, 1, 3. And here you have your C shape, and finally you're back on your A shape. Boom. Okay, sorry, some of my 3s look like 5s, but hope it makes sense over here. Awesome. Now you've mapped your fretboard with the cage system. Being able to do this is already huge. It shows that you have a great visual understanding of your fretboard. And doing this makes you a better guitarist. I promise, a better fretboard navigator. Okay, so now we're going to take green here. You can just add the notes that are missing to make your major pentatonic. So if we start with 1 over here, our 2 is actually going to be right there. Our 3 is going to be open, so you can play the open string here. Then 6 is open here. And then 1, 2, 5, 6. Boom. So those are your notes of the A shape major pentatonic. Then in the G shape, well, again, you'll see all the connecting points over here between shapes, but you have 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, and there we go. We have our G shape major pentatonic, starting with this one here. So A shape, there we did our G shape. I'll put the number shapes, so A shape, G shape. Then we have, after the G shape, we have the E shape. So here we go. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. 1, 2. Boom. That's the E shape. Recognize the order. So then the next shape is going to be our D shape. 1, 2. And then here we go. 2, 3, 5, 6. 1, 2. There we go. So that's the D shape. And finally, the C shapes over here. So 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. And then you can write this over here. All right, so this here is a real mapping of the fretboard in pentatonic scales using a knowledge of where the chord tones are with the cage system, and then adding the missing intervals. If you can write this diagram on a blank fretboard, you officially know where your pentatonics are on the fretboard. Now, once you've written this down, you can put your paper over here and finally take your guitar back and start playing these shapes. Before you do this, what I want you to do is put on a drone note. You can just go to YouTube or whatever you want to do if you have a DAW or a loop pedal, and then just put your reference note in the background. This is going to be a great anchor for your ear while you're playing your shapes, so that you're looking at the diagram you just drew, you're looking at the intervals, at where the tonic is, the second and everything, and you're hearing it. So you're doing this whole all-encompassing exercise. It's going to be great for you. Start with the A shape. D shape. C shape. And A shape again. Okay, after this, what you could do, and what I recommend doing, is writing that same diagram, but with the relative minor framework, okay? So again, because we're looking at the relative minor, which remember is G minor, we're gonna find the same exact notes. They're gonna be identical in terms of those literal spots on the fretboard, but the intervals of each of these notes is gonna change because our reference changes. So I'm starting back from scratch. My new reference now is the root is now G, which is there's one over here, and then one over here. Those are my main references. If I write my cage system, my E shape is going to give me 5, 1, flat 3, 5, 1. So that's my E shape. Then remember, that was the D shape in the major cage system, okay? So you'll recognize the same notes when we do the pentatonic scale, but different things. Over here, if we look at the D shape, I would have my flat 3 over here. My 5 is open, and then my 1 is open as well. Then the minor shape, 5, 1, flat 3. Then we go to our C shape. I got a flat 3 right here. And then the A shape, 5, 1, flat 3, 5. Boom. And then if I wanted to, I could go back, but this is good enough over here. Now I just have to complete the notes to get my minor pentatonic. So I'd have flat 3 right there. And then I've got 4, 5, flat 7, 1, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 7. Okay, so I fast forwarded over here to the finished result. I don't want to bore you with my drawing over here, but you get the idea. And now what you're going to do is change your drone note to a G, the relative minor drone note. Remember, you're going to be playing the same spots, but because now G is your tonic that's playing in the background, G becomes the 1. And all the other notes are going to make different intervals with that note. So let's try it out. And even if I started with B flat, right, with the same starting point as the previous, so it's B flat major, now it doesn't matter if I try to emphasize it melodically, the harmony wins. That drone note wins and becomes the 1. It's when I hit this note only that you get that resolution, a full resolution feeling. E shape. Now remember, that was this shape in B flat major, the G shape, but now it's my E shape minor. The D shape, C shape, A shape, and G shape. So here you've defined B flat major all over the fretboard. You've done G minor all over the fretboard with its own minor cage system references. You drew the note in the intervals on a fretboard and you listened to each of them with a drone note in the background. It's a great exercise. And you don't have to go fast with this one. So if you're just kind of discovering the pentatonic scale, great. Do it anyways. Do it exactly like this. You'll be light years ahead of most guitarists that just kind of start noodling around with boxes and minor pentatonics and relatives and stuff like that, right? If you start like this, you'll be golden when it comes to your fretboard navigation, orientation, and even just the way you conceptualize and hear these two scales. Now, lastly, what I'll do is I'll start doing some parallel. So essentially, and you can write these down on fretboard diagrams too, write the major, then write the parallel minor. But so you'll start, for example, here with B flat major in the A shape. And then switch to B flat minor. Try to mess around going back and forth between major and minor. Do this in each shape. B flat major in the G shape. B flat minor in the E shape. Then the D shape major. Minor shape. C shape major. C shape minor. When you do this, you can also have the B flat drone note in the background. It's actually great because now you can, again, you're really hearing the different sounds between the major and the parallel minor. So feel free to have that drone note always in the background. Whatever it is you're practicing, I really recommend it. have a drone note in the background. Bonus points, you can even sing the tools. As you're playing, try to sing at the same time, even if it's just in your head. But again, the more things you do like that, the more every part of your body and your mind and your ears are involved, the better. If your voice gets involved too, now you're really doing something amazing, because you're linking your inner voice, which is usually what's responsible for making melodies when you're soloing, to your fingers and to your ears and to your ability to just be intentional about what you play. So again, if you're more advanced, you can kind of make these exercises a little more difficult. Okay, so for example, you can go faster, you can start in the shape major, and then move up to the next shape, but minor, and then next step major, and then next step minor. So now you're having to really you're twisting your mind even more, trying to navigate and switch between parallel, major, and minor. So as long as you're doing some parallel and relative exercises, you can make these exercises as simple as hard as you want. Usually, the hardest things to do are to just challenge yourself with quickly having to do these changes. So you can also just increase the tempo of going up and down each major and parallel minor, or major and relative minor. Step number 4. Now is when you're going to start focusing a bit on technique. So when you're focused on technique, you can actually relax a little bit your caged vision and all the interval stuff and everything. The goal of technique is to just get better at playing those pentatonics in clearer, more articulate ways, adding more techniques such as hammer-ons, pull-offs, some slides, all these different things, right? It's just getting better at performing these pentatonics rather than just always obsessing over the navigation and the intervals. So here I'll refer, and you'll see there's a link again in the document, but I'll refer you to my video on technique fundamentals, where I go deep into how you can take basic pentatonic scale, for example, and tweak different things such as the time division, accents, different groupings, different note skippings, in order to make each of them more difficult. So for example, you could take your B-flat major pentatonic and play everything in groups of 3 or 4. Technique wouldn't be technique without a metronome, like I say, right? There's no such thing as a technique practice without a metronome. So take a metronome, set a challenging speed for you, a challenging time division or note grouping, and then go for it. Here's groups of 4 with the B-flat major pentatonic, and I'm going to do it in 16th notes. D shape. Etc., etc. And then you can do the same with the relative minor or the parallel minor, right? Depends on how much time you have for the practice. You can go as far as you want. Step number 5, okay? We're getting there. Step number 5, I love this one because guitarists have a tendency to always start and finish their scales on the same spot. So usually you'll start on the lowest note of the box, but we're not doing boxes anymore. So your main reference again for starting is going to be your tonic, whatever that tonic is. Okay. Now, you're not always going to start your lines on the tonic. And when you always start with the tonic, again, you're leveraging your sequential memory way too much. You're always generating the same order of notes. And that prevents you from really visualizing the shape before you get into playing. So there are several things that you can do to debunk this. The first step, I would say, is to play the shape upside down. Start with the highest note. So once you're done visualizing and you did all these exercises that we did, you're going to go through each shape, play the shape, then start, and then go back to your tonic. back to the tonic each time. All right? The goal is to not have to go up to then go down, okay? You can just see the shape and start it wherever you want. Starting on the high note is a great beginning. But then if you want to get a little more advanced, train yourself to start on a random string. For example, you could pick the G string, and wherever you are, you have to start that shape on the G string and go up. So I look at my E shape and go back to my tonic. In the D shape, in the C shape, right? Being able to start on whichever string you want before you even play anything is huge. Sometimes you don't want to start your solos on the 1 or on the 3 or on the 5. And so this forces you to think about these shapes differently and to have full control. You see those shapes as a whole before you start playing them, okay? Even better if you know what intervals that represent, okay? When I'm playing on my E shape, what's the first note on the G string? What does that note represent? Well, it's the 2. That's the 3. Right? If you can also see the interval and you can look at the fretboard diagram you've just done, then it's even better. Once you get more advanced, you can switch with every shape. So you start maybe with the tonic on the first one. When you get to your G shape, you start with the B string. Then you start maybe with the D string on the next shape. Then the G string, etc., etc. All right, you can go as far as you want there. The goal is to challenge yourself, to not do what you're always programming yourself to do, okay? Step number 6, cross pentatonic practices. That's when you're going to start trying to get out of the boxes that you are playing and to start linking them. So when you're playing, you want to get to a point where you're not just seeing the shape that you're playing, but also have a constant awareness of all the other shapes. I think it's Alan Holdsworth said, he doesn't see shapes, he sees one shape. There's just one shape for each scale for him. That means he can kind of see the whole fretboard as one big shape. Now, that's a little bit extreme, but I would say the first step towards that is to develop an awareness of at least the surrounding shapes. If I'm in my E shape here, how can I escape towards this shape or towards the next shape? So you're linking a shape with the surrounding shapes. Now again, I'm going to link to a PDF that's called Cross Pentatonic or Cross Shape Exercises, and there's several exercises that you can do to do this. One of the ones that I really like is, again here, you don't really worry about the cage system. You can even start wherever you want. And then you go up to the next shape. Go up there. Right, so you go down up a shape, then down the following, then up the following, then down the following. That's a great way to get started. But there's all sorts of other cross shape exercise that you can do. You can even practice playing the other extreme of box playing, which would be just on one string, right? Box playing would be imagining that your guitar just has 4 frets. The other extreme of this is pure horizontal playing, where you're imagining that your guitar only has 1 string. You can do this on each string. It's also a great exercise. Now, I want to say one thing over here. I really recommend that you practice and you master each shape of the cage system before you start getting too caught up with the cross shape thing, okay? And here's the reason for this. If you can't play a good solo in one shape, you can't play a good solo. Right? A shape, being limited to one shape, which by the way is a little more than 2 octaves, you can play a great solo with 2 octaves. There are other things involved there, other things that you need to start working on, all the other things that are in here, right? Having better melodic ideas, not playing always linearly, not always starting on the low note, all these things. But there are many great solos that have been made on like 2 little octave keyboards, so you don't need more than that. Of course, after a while, you want to be able to navigate. But if you're thinking, I can't play a good solo because I can't move across my shapes, that's not true. Probably you can't play a good solo and you can't move across your shapes, okay? But get really familiar with each shape of the cage system and the pentatonic scale, and then start linking these shapes together. Again, there is a document linked below. Okay, we've got 2 steps left. Step 7 is what I call lost somewhere on the fretboard. There's this super cool show that I used to watch when I was younger called Man vs. Wilde, and he was just kind of dropped in the middle of nowhere, and he had to find his way. It was like parachuted in the middle of nowhere, and he had to find his way back to civilization. It's the equivalent of this, but on the guitar. You're dropped somewhere on the fretboard, and you have to find whatever scale you want to find. So you're like, oh, here I am on fret number 7, and I need to find D major. Where is it? Here it is. You need to become able to find any pentatonic scale anywhere on the fretboard. Now, the exercise for this is very simple. What I want you to do is take the random note picker again. You're going to generate a series of 10 notes. The first note is going to tell you where you put your hand in reference to where that note is on the low E string. So here I generated 10 notes, and my first note is A. So boom, I put my hand on fret number 5 because A is the 5th fret on the E string there. So I'm right here. Then I look at all the other notes, and what I'm going to do is try to play whatever note I get pentatonic in this area of the fretboard. And I like alternating between major and minor. So here my second note is B flat. So where's B flat major here? Here's the closest one. The E shape, right? That comes again with a good knowledge of the cage system. So I didn't move and got my B flat major. That means if I'm lost here and someone says B flat major, I'm like, okay. Right there. C sharp is the second one. So I'm gonna go with C sharp minor this time. So C sharp minor, the closest one is right there. I got it with my pinky. Bonus points if you don't start with the low note. It starts with the high note, right? Combining these exercises together, again, making it more and more challenging if you're advanced enough. Then I've got G, so I've got to find G major here. Easy, got G right there, D shape. All right, D flat minor is the next one. Well, that's the same as C sharp minor. Right there. You get the idea, all right? You just alternate like that with the last note. This exercise is amazing. Honestly, if you can do this exercise quickly, and again, maybe you have a metronome and you try to find those scales as soon as possible, and you can play it without starting with the low note, you'll become a monster. At that point, you're a monster, you're unstoppable, okay? It's a great exercise. Okay, guys, at that point, it's finally time to have some fun. If you manage to go through all these steps, do some theory, write down the notes of a scale, the minor scale, the relatives, the parallels, etc. Find those notes on fretboard diagrams. Then play these scales and shapes one by one on the fretboard, looking at your diagrams. And then doing some relative, some parallel, a little bit of technique, right? Challenging yourself technically. Then getting into starting maybe these shapes in different spots, doing some cross shape exercises, right, where you're trying to go diagonally. And then finally losing yourself somewhere random on the fretboard and trying to find your way with different pentatonics. If you can do these steps, follow these steps, you will make incredible progress. And you can congratulate yourself at this point. If you can go through, and at this point you can congratulate yourself. If you can get through all these steps in a single practice and be disciplined and focused enough to do this, I am not worried at all. I know you're going to be a crushing guitarist at some point. Now, if a practice like this is too much for you, it's okay. You don't have to do all the steps. You don't have to spend 30 minutes on each step, and you don't have to do this whole thing in one sitting, right? Maybe one day You write down the scales, you do the fretboard navigation, you come back to it later or the day after, and then you do the other steps, all right? It's not a linear thing, but it's a structure. It's a format. It's something you can hold on to when you don't know what to practice and you just feel like you could be better at your pentatonic scales, at navigating the fretboard with technique. This exercise is going to train all these things. It's also going to train your ear, right? It's great for your melodic ideas and improvisational skills. Trust me, all right? Now, if you get towards the end, you need to congratulate yourself and you need to start putting these into a real musical context. So here, that's the time where you take a loop pedal out, write a little chord progression in B flat major and or B flat minor and or the relative, which are G minor and D flat major. You don't have to improvise over all of these 4 keys, but I would at least do B flat major, which was the focus point kind of today, and then maybe at least B flat minor, the parallel, or G minor. You can also just go on YouTube, find some backing tracks. There's so many things that you can do there, okay? Now again, if you enjoyed these videos, please subscribe to the channel. If you're interested in going further into exploring the guitar and you think you need some personal attention, mentoring, and coaching towards getting you to the next level of your guitar playing, if you're really plateauing, having a hard time understanding theory, and you would like to get out of this rut quickly, and I'm talking 12 to 16 weeks, so it's really quick, then I do offer one-on-one mentoring. I've now helped so many students reach their guitar goals with a method that I've spent years really crafting and designing to make sure that it's as efficient, accessible, and understandable as possible. All I ask from you is that you know your open chords, you know how to physically execute some bar chords, and you can play at least a pentatonic scale somewhere on the fretboard. People like Andy over here, Andy was just like many other guitarists. He was good, had a lot of potential, good ear, decent technique, but just did not know how to navigate with the cage system, did not understand what I talked about in this video about really applying the pentatonic scales and opening up your vision of the fretboard, major, minor pentatonic, incorporating triads, more scales, modes, and he had no theory understanding. And after 16 weeks, he was just crushing. Here's a little word from him.
You're showing me the light, man. I've been in this haze ever since I started playing the guitar. So yeah, I love that. I mean, I'm just learning how you're amazing guitarist. Your knowledge is amazing, and uh, that's why I wanted to take your course, just to make sense of everything, you know? I think out of the whole course this last week, connecting the cage shapes with the major things are really getting exciting, clicking, and I
Yeah.
think after this next week, it's even going to be more exciting because they're like these little building blocks, you know.
Yes.
Um, but
Yep.
yeah, and like I would recommend you to any guitar player.
So if you're interested and you see a link below in the video, that means I still have some spots available in my program. If you click the link, it'll say free intro call. You'll be invited to book a free consultation or lesson or session with me. And I'll basically give you all the guidance that you need. I'll tell you the roadmap and the step-by-step method that I use. You can then take this method and go on your own. Or if you're interested and you really want personalized training, then we can get started together and I will help you reach your musical goals. It's directly with me. It's not some group stuff or whatever. It's one-on-one, you and me, and I help you get there. All right? Let's play some B flat major pentatonics.